Usual committee in a number of respects. I've said this before, but it bears repeating tonight, I think. We do not have offices, we do not have staff, we do not have a budget. We do not have any authority whatsoever. So, why are you all here this evening? Presumably for the same reason we're here, which is that we were asked by the 3 members of Congress if we could take community input, synthesize it, and make recommendations to those 3 members of Congress so that they could continue to work with the folks at the FAA to provide some measure of relief. That means that everyone is doing most of what's happening with a fair amount of cooperation and collaboration, which I want to express my appreciation for. But as we go through the process tonight, I'm going to ask that you direct your comments to the committee, and then ultimately we will have to synthesize all that at subsequent meetings, which will be discussed later tonight. So, with that, I think it's time to go to Mr. Steve May from the FAA. Mr. May, we have asked you in Mr. Martin's stead to share with us a brief overview of the 6 feasible lists or feasibility items that you have identified for some conversation tonight, and we just ask you to begin. The emphasis, as always, is layman's language, layman's language, layman's language. Plain English to the greatest degree possible will help us have a good discussion when the time comes.
From coast to coast, the FAA is upgrading the nation's air traffic control system and improving the safety, efficiency, reliability, and availability of air transportation in the United States. Perhaps no other region better demonstrates the need for a modernized system than the region that is represented here this evening. You're probably familiar with the name of our modernization program, the Next Generation Air Transportation System, or Next Gen. Among other things, Next Gen includes new computer systems, receiver stations and digital communications, as well as new satellite-based air routes. Much of the program is invisible to both the traveling public and residents of communities near and under flight paths. The satellite-based procedures...
Whoa. Let me help put this in perspective before Mr. May goes on. I mentioned earlier we have no authority, which means ultimately we have to rely on our ability and the ability of our elected officials, the 3 members of Congress, to persuade the FAA. I am of the view we will be more persuasive if we show a little graciousness and try and carry ourselves in a good way. So hold those groans for after the program, but right now let's try and be courteous to all of the speakers tonight, whether they're from the FAA or from members of the public, regardless of whether we agree or disagree. Mr. May, please proceed.
The satellite-based procedures, or air routes, are probably the most recognized part of our modernization program. More than 7,000 satellite-based procedures are operating today in our skies, and they now outnumber traditional radar-based procedures. Developing a safer and more predictable level of service is vital to maintaining our system performance. Safety is improved by these more precise routes that automatically keep planes separated from one another and through reduced pilot-controller communications. Efficiency and environmental benefits come from the ability to create more direct routes and come from new arrival procedures that allow planes to essentially glide down to the airport with their engines at idle power. To use a household analogy, these arrivals are like sliding down the banister instead of walking down the stairs. Now, no modernization effort is without its challenges, especially in places like Northern California, which has some of the most complex airspace in the country. While the vast number of satellite-based procedures nationwide have been implemented seamlessly, we know that a few have generated controversy. We're sensitive to the community concerns and want to work hard to address them when possible. The Northern California Noise Initiative began in response to concerns that residents in Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco counties expressed about both long-standing noise issues and some of the changes we made to Northern California arrival and departure procedures. The FAA believes the public has asked the question, can we do better? So with the leadership of the local congressional members and the time and efforts of you, the Select Committee, we are working to better understand the community's concerns and seek more local input about areas where there may be less impact, while ensuring the modernization of the national airspace system remains safe for the 750 million passengers that fly each year. Within the initiative, you will see the FAA has received recommendations for new and modified flight procedures from community members, from municipalities and cities, from various groups, some of whom the Select Committee will hear from tonight. The FAA developed a detailed plan of action to explore the proposed remedies that we received. We have reviewed all of the specific proposals and recommendations. The steps in this review included a detailed analysis, a flyability assessment, an operational assessment, and finally a feasibility determination. What this means is our team, which included representatives from local air traffic control facilities, focused on whether the proposals met FAA safety criteria, whether they could be flown by the various aircraft and airlines that operate in the Bay Area, and we also assessed the proposal's impacts to surrounding airports and traffic flows. The feasibility determination was made after all aspects of the study were completed and were considered in the determination. Given that many proposals were similar or try to address the same concerns, following our analysis, we determined that proposals in 6 areas are feasible. The first area is airspace design changes to ensure safety. This involves amending the highly controlled airspace around San Francisco to ensure that aircraft remain within this protected area while arriving at the airport. This change could potentially allow more San Francisco arrivals to fly on idle power into the airport, thus addressing some noise concerns on the ground. We have already begun this process. The second area is making adjustments to arrival procedures over the South Bay, including the surfer procedure. We hope the committee will help identify improvements and provide guidance from the region's perspective. The third area is making adjustments to the use of existing departure procedures during nighttime operations. This would involve keeping aircraft on certain departure procedures for longer distances, thereby adjusting where they fly and trying to address concerns identified. The fourth area is amending departure procedures also during nighttime operations. This may create new transition points for San Francisco departures flying to southern destinations during certain times overnight, trying to better use the bay to address noise concerns. The fifth area is evaluating and adjusting Oakland and San Francisco departures. Both San Francisco and Oakland departures predominantly depart over the bay. This creates a dependency that does shape and guide the flight paths as they proceed south. These suggestions involve trying to keep the departures either over water or adjusting the flight path, helping to address the noise issues as they turn to the south. And the sixth and final area is improving the management of aircraft between air traffic control facilities. This area would improve the flow management of arrivals and would help to have aircraft arrive in the region when capacity is available, thus requiring less controller instructions at lower altitudes, for example, turns and speed restrictions. This improvement may potentially result in more aircraft flying on idle power into San Francisco and addressing issues like speed breaks power-ups, and turns that have some impact on the amount of noise generated. The feasibility report has been provided to both the Select Committee and also to the San Francisco Community Noise Roundtable. We anticipate the Select Committee will accept public input, review FAA proposals, and make recommendations on issues identified in the FAA's initiative with a focus on arrival issues that primarily impact the South Bay region. Additionally, we believe the San Francisco Airport and the San Francisco Community Noise Roundtable will also accept public input, review FAA proposals, and make recommendations on issues identified in the initiative with a focus on departures and arrivals that primarily impact the San Francisco Community Roundtable geographical area. The FAA looks forward to working with the committee and the roundtable to help forge regional solutions to many of the noise issues that your communities face today. We are prepared to collaborate with both groups to review the ideas and proposals we received and seek improvements that will balance the need for a modernized air transportation infrastructure with the impacts it may have on local communities. We also seek the public's insights that can help the FAA proactively address community concerns and engage local communities more effectively during our outreach efforts. It is important to note that once a regionally vetted recommendation is presented to the FAA, we must conduct all required safety and environmental reviews before implementing any changes. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for the work you are doing to address these very sensitive and complex issues.
Thank you.
There
you go.
Okay, there we go. So good evening. My name is Marie-Jo Fremont. I've been a Palo Alto resident for 23 years. I had a great life until recently. On behalf of Sky Policy Palo Alto and many concerned Palo Alto residents, I'd like to thank you for serving on this select committee and providing a forum for our presentations. Tonight, I will describe how we can achieve a fair regional solution. Sky Policy Palo Alto's purpose has always been to ask our city to invest and devote resources to solve our noise problem. Therefore, our first request to you is to work with our city and its aviation consultants to achieve two goals: immediate relief and long-term solutions. Before I describe how we can achieve these goals, let me summarize the Mid-Peninsula problem. With NextGen, the noise increased dramatically. Palo Alto, East Palo Alto and Menlo Park are now ground zero for San Francisco arrival noise. 3 major arrival routes converge over the Menlo Waypoint located near Willow Road and 101. This means more than 300 planes per day. That's over 100,000 jets per year. Loud, low, and frequent, often 1 to 2 minutes apart, multiple times a day. In Palo Alto alone, they fly over 65,000 residents, 18 schools, serving 12,000 students. Living under these planes is a serious health hazard. We need your help. Let me now address the FAA feasibility study. Our response is the list of proposals is incomplete. The language is vague. Some statements are misleading, and it does not analyze proposals interdependently, so it is insufficient as a regional solution. Finally, it offers 0 solutions for ground zero. Now, how do we achieve our 2 goals? Our first goal is immediate relief. Here are 3 possibilities. 1, route the arrivals over the full bay, especially at night. Use multiple approaches, multiple waypoints. 2, rebalance the bodega arrival from Point Reyes. Move the majority of the traffic back to the east leg over the water as it was in the past. Then disperse and raise the altitudes of the remaining planes on the west leg. 3, route the southern arrivals to the final approach localizers further south of the Dumbarton Bridge to increase the flying altitudes over the residential areas. Use a fanned approach to disperse and share the noise. These changes could be implemented in weeks or months. Goal number 2, long-term solutions. As a start, we suggest 4 actions. Action 1, disperse traffic. Vectoring is not a solution because it is noisy. We need route dispersion by design. Creating sacrificial noise corridors is unacceptable and unnecessary. So is merging 3 high-volume routes at 4,000 feet over people's homes at Menlo when the bay is less than 2 miles away. The FAA must identify alternatives that do not use Menlo. Action 2, maximize the use of the bay. There are almost 22 nautical miles of water directly in front of SFO's runways. Let's use them to increase the flying altitudes over populated areas. Here's a concept illustrating full bay routing. Arrivals from the south would come up over the Central Valley, then over uninhabited or industrial areas east of 101, west of I-5, then through traffic gaps west of San Jose Airport or other routes to reach the end of the bay at higher altitudes. Arrivals from the northeast could be routed over Modesto and the Milpitas corridor at high altitudes as they were in the past. Using the full bay means that planes will no longer fly over communities from Santa Cruz to East Palo Alto. Action 3, use best-in-class technology. Increase the descent angles. Steeper angles means higher altitudes over homes. SFO is using only 2.85 degrees, which is not best in class. European airports use 3.2. Hanover, Germany, is even testing 4.5 degrees in the so-called whisper approach. Use precision navigation to disperse traffic through herringbone or trident patterns, and raise the start of the final approach to 5,000 feet, as they did in Frankfurt. Improve traffic management by sequencing planes much earlier over unpopulated areas, and by designing idle profile descents that fly idle all the way to final, as NextGen promised, but as undelivered to us. Optimized profile descents are noisy. What we need is idle to final to have quiet. These noise abatement solutions are happening at other airports. Frankfurt is a good example. Why can't we do it here? Action 4, install noise monitors. Noise measurements are critical not only to calibrate the FAA model, but also to measure the noise impact of proposed changes. Finally, let me talk about getting to win-win solutions for the whole region. We need to broaden our options. I've mentioned some ideas, but there are more. Let's gather technical experts who can develop a comprehensive list of solutions. Their list should include new proposals from noise groups, consultants, our cities, and others, along with existing proposals from the feasibility study. Who are these experts? The FAA, of course, but the participants must include the local air traffic control personnel who have expertise in our metroplex. We also need independent aviation consultants to represent our cities. This technical body would follow a design process with continuous improvement. As a very first step, these experts should attend the technical meetings in July. In conclusion, we can find win-win solutions for our region. Start at ground zero and build up from there. Win-win solutions don't exist in the current FAA analysis. Please get technical experts around the table starting in July to help develop solutions that work for the whole region. And please work with our cities. As changes are considered, providing timely information to the public about current and future noise impact is essential. Let's innovate to reduce noise for everyone. Thank you for doing the right thing and for serving all your constituents. Together, we can create a model for noise abatement solutions across our region and the United States.
Soon you will be deliberating on a wealth of content. Yesterday, an email was delivered from Quiet Skies Mid-Penn, a consensus letter from 13 advocacy groups across 3 counties describing 4 principles we hope you can lean upon to inform your decisions. I would like to review those principles for the audience. 1, noise experience as experienced on the ground must be made a priority. Safety is paramount, but noise is not a necessary byproduct of safety. 2, the FAA must adapt noise metrics that reflect true impact of noise on the ground. Current methods did not predict any significant impact of noise with the implementation of NextGen. Clearly, this did not represent an accurate model, evidenced by the over 3,800% increase of individuals filing noise complaints. NextGen is a suite of state-of-the-art technologies that deserved state-of-the-art metrics to inform the modernization of our skies. 3, the process to review changes must be open and transparent, and these assessments must be available for public comment. For example, there were solutions suggested that were not addressed in the FAA proposal. There were solutions that were deemed infeasible in what looked like smaller technicalities. And there were solutions that, when reading the fine print, weren't really what they appeared. For example, the FAA proposal stated that dispersion is not necessary because it is achieved through vectoring. Low-altitude vectoring is not the same as planned dispersion. And we also know that the FAA's goal is to further concentrate traffic, thus dispersion through vectoring will be minimized when they further sequence the flights into narrow corridors. 4th, solutions must not make winners or losers. There should be no such monster called a sacrificial noise corridor. No communities should be forced to bear the burden of exhaust pollution and low-altitude, nonstop airplane noise.
Folks, please, number one, it consumes time, and number 2, it can make it uncomfortable for folks who have different points of view to share them. So I'm just going to ask you to hold that thought, and we'll give you the extra 30 seconds back. Not to worry, Ms. Mulcahy.
Okay. Be it window rattling or low-grade noise, that shouldn't happen. There should be limits on traffic capacity and noise, just like there are capacity and pollution limits in other industries. Just because limits don't exist in the aviation industry does not make it right to take advantage of the gaping need for regulation. Character is what is doing what is right when no one is watching, or in this case, when no one is regulating. Those are 4 principles which, had they been employed in the redesign of our skies, we probably would not be sitting here today. Our skies have literally fallen. The lower the commercial air traffic, the lower the general aviation traffic. Please do not accommodate the falling sky with Band-Aid solutions such as adapting the Class B airspace. Raise the sky. Also, optimal profile descent, it works great in theory, but it does not work in the congested airspace. Flights as quiet as sliding down a banister sound divine, but we know that OPD is quieter, but it is not quiet. The goal should not be incremental improvement, but achieving prior to next-gen peace and quiet. The modernization of our skies, in the spirit of Silicon Valley innovation, must achieve profound improvement to the quality of human life. In the Mid-Penn area, there are blurred lines as to what was pre-next-gen rollout, what was pre-next-gen politicking, but we all know that March 2015 Surfer broke the camel's back. The Mid-Penn region gets nailed from all sides, especially those of us living under the maze, where planes from the west, the north, and the east, some flying directly over San Francisco Airport, vectored down the peninsula to merge with the already congested corridor of Surfer. There is a new commuter airline, Surf Air. There are flights in and out of San Jose Airport, and there is general aviation traffic. The Mid-Penn skies have to be decongested. Advocacy groups have worked with fear hanging over their heads. Fear for a way of life, fear for their health and the health of their families and property values, and fear the FAA will walk away. Attached to the consensus letter from Quiet Skies Mid-Penn is a list of recommendations to our congressional leaders. 1, create a permanent South Bay Committee for the reduction of aircraft noise. 2, establish a permanent technical working group. 3, insist on the adoption of international best practices. And 4, fund a technical working group to measure noise on the ground. Improvement now and in the future must not be mutually exclusive. Attached to the consensus letter was also a list of solutions or components of solutions for consideration by the technical working group. We know that other communities and other metroplexes across the nation have similar distress, and we hope we can create a model process and work together with the FAA. The Bay Area is not only where we live, the Bay Area is a way of life, where indoors and outdoors are seamless for much of the years, where our homes are simply home-based to cherished open spaces and to the playground of other communities. We need regional solutions for quiet. This is an issue of flight procedures, altitudes, and congestion on individual routes and in the maze. Principles: noise is the priority, noise must be measured, the review of solutions must be in good faith, and no sacrificial noise corridors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And forgive me, I'm not sure I asked, how many of you are affiliated with Quiet Skies Mid-Peninsula? Active with the group? And then how many of you would like to express support for the general principles and notions you just heard? Okay. Thank you very much. That takes us to Quiet Skies NorCal, and if you would introduce yourself for all of us, please. Let's not knock Ms. Mulcahy's card off. There we go. Thank you. And
Thanks.
Ms. Shelliff, welcome.
Hi, so I'm Ben Shelliff, and I'm with Quiet Skies NorCal. So people who follow these things will tell you that what we've achieved here in the Bay Area in terms of commitment and involvement of the elected and level of dialogue with the FAA is unprecedented. The trigger for this achievement was in January, when a woman named Cheryl Poland put together a series of summit meetings and showed to the elected that people from across the region can support a single unified ask. Not everybody signed up, but a critical mass was clearly there. Before the summits, I'll remind you, it was every town for itself. This was quickly followed by Anna Eshoo and Sam Farr's call to action. If we're to be successful, they said, we must create regional solutions. At that point, Quiet Skies NorCal was formed. Our proposal covers almost 20 cities, but we represent no single city. We've gathered over 1,000 endorsements for our plan, even though the plan carries no city flag. Not surprisingly, our endorsements are distributed equally between the Mid-Pen area, the Santa Cruz area, and the high-elevation mountain communities in between. We have endorsers who live in the mountains right under the old Big Sur track because they are still close enough to Surfer to be affected by it. They trust us that when we restore the flight path, we will also make sure it is as quiet as it used to be. That trust is there for a reason. Our solution development process was transparent and open for anyone to participate in, consisting of a series of workshops to which all groups were invited and most attended. Naturally, and unlike others, we've also publicly posted every proposal we've advocated for. No secrets. We earned their trust. As you recall, our summit meeting in Los Altos last month consisted of an open forum discussion, and all voices were given the stage, whether supportive of our plan or not. By being transparent and inclusive, I hope we earned your trust. Our trust and support extends throughout the Metroplex, and this support is for a plan that is actionable, is regional, and is considered feasible by the FAA. The Mid-Pen Coalition activists are opposing our plan. They made it abundantly clear in their letter from yesterday. However, their consensus letter is full of items that are either technically impossible or morally wrong. Grand promises are easy to sell, but they are useless if they're not feasible. When closely inspected, the plan boils down basically to moving Surford eastwards, and that puts it directly over Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Cupertino. And I doubt that these cities agreed with this plan. So the plan is hardly a consensus, and there's nothing regional about it. These are activists that are so captivated by the prospect of shifting traffic over to other cities that they firmly resist feasible proposals that greatly benefit their own cities. They're doing their communities a huge disservice by dragging them down a dead-end path. Their plan inevitably takes us back to where we were last year. A huge number of one-man advocacy groups playing musical chairs while making no progress towards a solution. And a bunch of cities trying to gang up on another bunch of cities. It's back to what we see in other metroplexes. Quiet Skies NorCal presented you with an actionable proposal that improves the lives of all communities in the South Bay. It might not solve all of the noise problems in the region, but it certainly solves the next-gen related problems, since these have had the most severe impact, are easily identifiable, and easily fixable. The solution set is not terribly creative. It is based on the simple idea that to the greatest extent possible, we should restore the flight environment to what it was before March 2015. And there are 3 reasons for this. First, we know that the next-gen transition caused a very large increase in complaints in each and every city represented here. So restoring a known good state, by definition, is an improvement for all and carries the least risk of unintended consequences. Second, we respect historical flight tracks. People who haven't bought a house under a flight path should not be gifted with one. The affected residents filed their protest within hours or days, so have every right to demand to put it back without it being considered moving noise. We simply ask to undo last year's move. We're not taking it anywhere it wasn't already at. Third, in absolute terms, the old flight path affected less people, especially in high elevation communities. It is objectively a better path and not by accident. It was designed that way. Big Sur avoided as much population as possible in both the Santa Cruz Mountains and in the Mid-Penn area. It does not overfly San Lorenzo Valley or Happy Valley or Summit and makes the best use of the Stanford Industrial Park near Los Altos. The punchline here is very simple. Big Sur should not have been moved to begin with. We all realize that now. The FAA says it's okay to move it back, so please move it back. However, put it back is not just about flight tracks. It's also about descent profiles. You've heard from Mid-Penn and SLV that they would have been fine with restoring the ground track, but that they are concerned that the new OPD procedure will be as noisy as Surfer is today. Interesting, though, both groups have also told you that you should not rely on laymen for solutions, but rely on the FAA, who has the best minds in the world working on this and knows what it is doing. So here's what the FAA has to say about OPD and Surfer. First, OPD is designed to be the quietest way to fly an airplane. It's based on idle power descent, just like Big Sur was. In fact, the end-to-end slope of the old Big Sur arrival over the peninsula happens to precisely match the FAA guideline for OPD. So OPD is simply a streamlined version of the same practices that made Big Sur quiet. OPD is part of NextGen and is mentioned in the feasibility report over 30 times, so the FAA is clearly committed to it. Second, the FAA says Surfer is not noisy because OPD is noisy, but because OPD is not followed due to specific, well-understood design flaws. When the ground track is shifted back, the flaws will be addressed and OPD will be followed. So what's happening today over the Surfer track cannot and will not keep happening. Third, and most important, Glenn Martin entered this enterprise by establishing mutual trust with Representatives Eshu, Farr, and Spear. Glenn does not want them in his office next year demanding answers. Thinking that Glenn is promising a quiet route and is then going to pull a fast one on us and split is paranoid. If Glenn wanted to leave us with a noisy and inefficient arrival, he's already got one. See, SLV's stance when unmasked is simply move it as far away from us as possible. And that's no different from Skyplus's move Surfer eastward concept, with the exception that Palo Alto at least has a legitimate noise problem. SLV, on the other hand, is not overflown by either the new or the old ground tracks, has never had a noise issue, and there's no reason to think that it ever will.
And Mr. Shelf, wrapping up if you could, please.
Just the one. Meanwhile, the impact on the Happy Valley Corridor, Summit area, and Mid-Penn cities is real and absolutely devastating. Once again, the punchline is simple. These are false concerns. Please put the route back where it belongs.
All right, thank you. And if you'd introduce yourself for the folks.
My name is Raymond Guindon, and I represent Quiet Skies Woodside. I will present an analysis of the sharp increase of airplane noise over Woodside following phases of the next-gen rollout and our ask of the FAA. Executive summary. Following March 15, 2015, the Bricks route was added over Woodside. Following the October 15, 2015 next-gen phase, exacerbated by RNAV shift and narrowing of flight paths, the nighttime West Oceanic arrivals have created severe sleep disruption of residents from Woodside to Palo Alto. Please read Appendix 1, Select Committee Member. But today I will focus on Woodside receiving a disproportionate amount of the noise burden of the vectored surfer. We receive over 1/3 of all vectored surfer flight, and vectored surfer fly at the lowest altitude in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR, also with the use of noisy speed brakes. We ask the FAA, please do not shift more routes or vectored flights over Woodside. Please reduce the number of vectored surfer over Woodside. Please raise altitude of all vectored flights, surfer including, to a minimum of 8,000 feet for the same noise abatement reason as the issue agreement codified in a TRACON order. Please route all nighttime West and North Oceanic over the bay to the Bodega East leg. Oh. Sorry about this here. Okay. The SFO Roundtable Aviation Consultant, Ms. Cindy Gibbs, in her draft response to the feasibility document, acknowledges the traffic burden in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR brought by vectored traffic, including vectored surfer. Our focus is on a quantitative analysis of the vectored surfer flights in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR. It is based on the standard gate that is used by the SFO Noise Abatement Office reports on the daily number of West Oceanic flights that fly below the required minimum altitude of 8,000 feet. A gate is a virtual two-dimensional window in space where we measure aircraft traffic crossing through the window. Our analysis focused on post-October 15, 2015 phase of NextGen by looking at a representative 1 week, December 4 to 10, 2015. And the data is from Freedom of Information Act FAA data. This figure shows the surfer route and the surfer traffic all the way from Santa Cruz to SFO Airport. As mentioned by the FAA, 50% of all surfer flights are vectored. The red indicates lower altitude and the green indicates higher altitude. Note that the altitude of the surfer flights near the Woodside VOR is only 4,270 feet above ground level. Also note that vector traffic uses noisy speed brake, creating a significant noise burden at ground level at such low altitude. Note that the altitude of vector surfer in other areas is much higher, from 10,000 to 14,000 feet, yielding an above ground level altitude of 8,000 to 14,000 feet. So, Woodside received a disproportionate amount of the noise burden of surfer due to very low altitude vectoring. This next analysis shows that the number and altitude of the vector surfer flights, the vector northern flights and the West Oceanic flights that converge near the Woodside VOR. Orange, which is difficult to see but is a surfer, vectored surfer. Green are the oceanic and blue are the northern, vector northern flight. Note that the surfer accounts for most of the traffic over the Woodside VOR, 43%. It has also the lowest altitude, 4,270 feet above ground level, and a separate analysis determined that Woodside receives above 1/3 of all the vector surfer flight. Excuse me. So with 1/3 of the vectored traffic, with 1/3 of the vectored surfer traffic flying a low altitude of 4,270 feet above ground level and the large noise impact of speed brake at such low altitude, Woodside received a disproportionate amount of the noise burden. of surfer. Our ask of the FAA: reduce the number of vectored surfer over Woodside and spread more equitably, for example, by using greater use of holding patterns and vectored further west over the ocean, and make earlier turn to SFO. Raise the altitude of vectored surfer flights to 8,000 feet or above for the same noise abatement reasons that require West Oceanic flights to be at or above 8,000 feet in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR. Surfer traffic should not use speed breaks in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR. In other words, move speeds adjustments over water instead of land. Conclusion: vectoring large percentage of surfer flights in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR is not dispersal. It is planned concentration, and it is not equitable. Please do not use the Woodside VOR vicinity as a low-altitude makeshift holding pattern for any traffic. Finally, reading from a Woodside Town resolution, the Town of Woodside is vehemently opposed to any modification to routes that would increase the traffic in the vicinity of the Woodside VOR. I would like to ask the Select Committee member to please read the Appendix 1 on the sleep disruption caused by nighttime West Oceanic flights and suggested approaches. Thank you to all the Select Committee.
This is the time for public comment. I think we have a number that have already been collected. It looks like a very thick stack. That concludes the public comment to the Select Committee for this evening's community hearing. That takes us to some discussion of our next steps, which obviously we want to share with the hardcore who's still with us here late tonight. I think most of the committee members know, and probably most of the public as well, that we have two working groups that are, working meetings, I should say, of our Select Committee that are scheduled for July 15th and July 22nd, Friday afternoons. As we've been asked to report back to the three members of Congress. That's what we all signed up for. They asked us to look specifically at the 6 feasible items that have been identified by the FAA. I think, my judgment, that is our first obligation. That's what we're asked to do. That's what we need to do, respond to those 6 items. So, in my view, first obligation is to respond to the mandate or charge we were given. Second obligation is to say, all right, but what else should we be grabbing while the grabbing is good? And then the third obligation, I would think, is to say, what are some of the longer term considerations or concerns going forward? I'm just going to toss out a couple because they keep coming up. The issue of how noise is measured, to the extent that it's measured at all, has some longer term implications. The issue of some sort of a body that can serve longer term at the end of this Select Committee's work to deal with these issues, which are not going to be fully resolved by the time we wrap our work up before the end of the year. I think that's something as well. There may be many others. I'm just using those 2 as examples.
Okay, thank you, Mr. May, for being here. So for the 15th meeting, I would be very interested to know if we were to move back to the March 2015 route schedule, what would be the implications of that move, right? Timeline-wise, is it doable? Safety measures, as well as what impact that would potentially have on the Menlo corridor or the Peninsula corridor flight patterns as they stand right now. Also, there was some discussion about really taking a look at what they have successfully been able to do in Germany with their airlines. I would like to get a little bit of information as to the feasibility of adopting possibly some of their practices as it relates to the airlines who are being serviced by SFO. I think that came up as well. And I would like to know from the FAA on our 15th meeting, what items didn't make the list of 6 that were under consideration, but for whatever reason weren't included in the final report of recommendations for this body.
And I appreciated getting, as I expected here in Santa Clara County, the viewpoints of people here. There was a couple points made. I think that they said that all planes not fly lower than 4,000 feet, if that's practical, or I think we're talking about the Menlo waypoint in particular. I mean, how low they were coming in there regularly. I think I heard it right, but just wanted to get clarification. And I know some of the issues that are facing Santa Cruz County. It seems like there was a lot of push to move Surfer to Big Sur, but from my understanding, the FAA said no. If we move it to Big Sur, we cannot. We're going to keep it a lower flight pattern than was there previously. And is that correct, or could it be higher? I think that I just was interested in this. I'm not an engineer, but this 5,000 retrofit for vortex generators was an interesting point to me. I don't know if that can help everybody everywhere.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple quick comments. There was one question was asked tonight. You have a simple answer for it. Was that people have noticed some changes in the past week or 2 weeks, and I just wanted to know. There was some discussion at our first meeting in San Francisco that when the OPD was going to be put into effect, I believe the comment was made that it could take 2 years for it to be fully optimized. So my question is this just a work in progress that's possibly getting better, or have you made any changes to anything in the past 2 weeks? And the second question is, I'm from Capitola, so this is kind of where the planes come in. We're not really represented from anything further away than that, so we would be the farthest point. And what I've noticed just in the last week or so is that I'm hearing planes, or actually I'm not hearing planes. So I'd like an explanation as to why I'm seeing planes and I'm not hearing them, and this is about, I'm going to say, 10 to 20%. Because if a plane is not heard in Capitola, then my feeling is that it's going to be progressively better as it approaches Menlo. But when they're completely audible entering into our airspace or our ground track, then obviously this situation magnifies it as it increases. But I just want to say that I've noticed planes that I do not hear. I see planes and do not hear them, which makes me think that there's hope. I just want to see if you have an explanation for that. Thank you.
Council member?
Guess I'll do it this side. Thank you. I think my questions are going to run to a couple different areas, but principally one of the things I want to try and understand, certainly from the FAA's perspective, is number one, what is your commitment to working with the regional representatives on an ongoing basis beyond this point? I think it was obviously the longer-term goal, but in my mind, you start there in many cases and start to work back. And I'm hopeful that the FAA is going to be willing to continue to engage, just given the magnitude and complexity of the problems that we've heard tonight and in all the other 2 sessions. And I think part of the missing equation, certainly from a number of the groups that have spoken and consultants we've been working with, has been the level of involvement of TRACON, NorCal TRACON, in those discussions. You mentioned 4 different processes you've gone through, and I would really like to understand, given we know that, for instance, vectoring is responsible for 50% of the flights off of the new Surfer are being vectored, is how involved has the TRACON been in potentially coming up with potential adjustments and solutions, waypoint movements, altitude adjustments, any number of the considerations that have been put forward by some very educated and active people here. So in my mind, a very missing piece to date has been understanding the TRACON level of involvement. And are you willing to fine-tune proposals if it is put forward by your folks in that area that they believe some of these adjustments could in fact benefit any number of the issues that we're talking about? And I think the next one final comment I would make is that certainly there have been lots of issues raised about altitude. There have been procedures that have been referenced, and some in the area I represent relative to agreements that obviously haven't been adhered to, and understanding how anybody can get comfortable, or how we can all get comfortable with whatever agreements and recommendations this group makes, that it will be enforced and in fact be something that we can look to make sure that if we are making these adjustments that they stay in place and that we have the proper metrics in place to measure the success of those.
Supervisor Pine.
Thank you, Mr. May, for being with us tonight and hanging in there in this long evening. So a couple points, some I'll reiterate from my colleagues and a couple of new ones. I think at the next meeting it will really be helpful for all of us in the public to understand in real detail, when we move, if we move this Surfer back to Big Sur, what are the characteristics of that route? I mean, we know it's not. We're not putting the. Some think we're putting it back the way it was. That doesn't seem to be the direction that the FAA has in mind. So if we just really very specifically understand components of that proposal. We've heard a lot about the east leg of the Bodega arrival. I'd like to hear more about that. And a constant theme is the problem with vectoring with virtually every flight pattern, and what can be done to reduce that. And then I shared the sentiment about the Airbus 319 and 320. What is the FAA's thoughts on what appears to be a simple fix?
Board President Purnell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. May. During your own presentation, you mentioned idle power, sliding down a banister, actually making way for more planes to use the same airspace. The discussion that Mr. Pine and others have just brought up were relative to this use of OPD, the Optimized Profile Descent. And the specific question is whether you can assure the FAA planning group who works on whether a new solution comes to pass or the movement back to Big Sur, whether you can utilize OPD for that flight path. And another question that would follow along with that, in the case that Mr. Simidian made of longer-term solutions versus capturing the low-hanging fruit, if we can implement some of these easier solutions quickly, perhaps the one that's been discussed by many of the groups tonight, Big Sur versus Surfer, would the FAA consider completing a full environmental impact study, not a simulation, of the NorCal Metroplex while these feasible short-term solutions are implemented? That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Bernal.
Thank you. I have had two of these meetings, one day and next, because I missed last week. So I spent yesterday reviewing the tape, and there were themes that became apparent, especially with everything combined in 2 days. So I have a series of questions, some of which you have all touched on. Again, OPD, is it based on idle power flight? I want a definition. I want to understand that we are doing idle power or it is something else. Is the FAA planning, again, we've heard this question, to make sure OPD is correctly implemented in the new route? Can we discuss the possibility of vectoring over EPIC? Will this committee and the technical group be addressing changes to BRICS? What will be the exact proposed flight pattern changes tonight regarding flying over the South Bay? This came up again tonight with concerns about moving flights over to Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, Milpitas, or San Jose. Will noise monitoring or modeling be addressed and or be implemented? And I'd like to piggyback off of what Ann said, because I'm curious to know, and I'm hoping maybe we might know tonight, if TRACON will be attending our tech meetings.
Mr. Mayor?
Just one question for Mr. May. I think a member of the public was recommending a 90-day trial period if indeed this select committee lands on a change that the FAA endorses. Are we going to be able to have a period of time where we test fly it? And if so, are we going to be able to measure anything to know that we've made an improvement? And maybe more for the Chairman Siminian. We go back to the beginning, the first community partner who spoke to us, Ms. Fremont, mentioned bringing experts into our technical groups. Would we be able to invite, I know we can't pay them, but would we be able to invite aviation experts? They have been indispensable for the SFO Roundtable Committee.
I think that's a conversation that we are probably going to want to have at that first meeting. I am mindful of the fact that the FAA is supposed to be our technical resource. I'm also a little anxious about opening up the possibility of a dozen different committee members inviting 24 different sets of experts who happen to reflect their point of view. That being said, I don't want there to be any confusion. This is a decision that the entire committee will have to make. We can have that conversation at our next meeting, and in fact, I'll ask my staff to make sure we put it on the agenda. The other thing is, clearly we need to make sure we have the technical expertise to make the recommendations to the members of Congress. So my first hope is that we'll be able to get that from the FAA, and we've certainly gotten a lot of it from the 12 different community groups, but if we need additional resources, we should have that conversation.
And the final question is, I believe our charge as it relates to NextGen is specific to SFO, and yet recently I've been very much aware of how surf air at San Carlos is impacting the Mid-Peninsula region, having spent an afternoon at a ball field, and was just kind of amazed at how many flights come out of San Carlos and are very impacting noise-wise. Can we enter that arena, or are we?
First of all, I'm always happy to defer to my colleagues on the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors when the subject of surf air comes up, and I think they really are on it with respect to this issue. You know, this is a committee of 12 independently elected officials. So not in this lifetime am I going to try and say to anybody at this table what we can or can't talk about. That being said, I think you can tell what my predisposition is if I say, really, you don't think we have enough on our hands already? So look, I think we all know in the real world, Oakland is not irrelevant. San Jose is not irrelevant. Our municipal airports are not irrelevant. That being said, we've been given a charge by the members of Congress, and I'd like us to stay as close to the confines of that charge. Why don't I turn it over to somebody from the surf air world?
We have been working very hard on the surf air issue and have put county resources against that, and have been making some progress. Has been mentioned by one of the speakers. A new flight pattern will be tested. That looks very promising. We have extensive outreach planned. We're looking at all our procedures. There's a pretty robust effort underway within the county of San Mateo, which I can fill you in on further.
Council member?
Thank you. A couple of questions. You know, it occurs to me that we really have just one topic we're dealing with here, and that topic is noise. And when I asked your other FAA leader, I've forgotten his name.
Mr. Martin.
Mark. Yeah, thank you. What he said was that we model it and we determine whether or not it meets the requirements of the noise. But that model has never, ever been tested against real data. And I'm astonished that you're able to predict behavior absent test data to validate the model. So I'd like to know that that's going to happen. More importantly, the noise spec that's being used was developed in the early 70s. This was a period when we had very different engines, DC-9s, 707s, 727s. They all had the jet turbine. Today, we don't have hardly any of those, if any. It's more of the turbofan, and they have an entirely different noise characteristic. In those days, very high frequencies were obvious from the engines. You had noise spikes from resonances from the turbine blades. You don't have that anymore. And so my question is, how valid is the existing noise requirement? And in my view, it needs to be re-looked at, because the FAA has three requirements that they really have to live with. The first one is aircraft safety. The second one is the effect of noise on the ground. And the third is overall efficiency. But when you have a model that guarantees passing item number 2, it's just like taking it right out of the list. And I don't understand how the FAA has been able to do that with a straight face. No tests, no data. It looks good. Check back the box. It's not right. So I'd like to get a better explanation of how that's going to happen and what we can do to update that model to more correctly accommodate what we're really experiencing today. That's item 1. Item 2, I'd like to hear that the FAA would be willing to work both from a political as well as a technical perspective on a continuing dialogue. This select committee has been, I think, a real eye-opener for a lot of people. But we're not going to solve all these problems, certainly not in one 6-question answer. So I think this is going to need to go on further on. And so the question I would have is, are you willing to participate with us in an ongoing strategy to help make this better and better? It's a lot like build a little and test a little, as opposed to redesign and plop it on there, unlike we saw this time. It's not really working well, and I think we all know that. So the question is, how can we incrementally change it over time? The third question deals with, can you describe for us just how the air traffic controllers interact with the airplanes and how closely aligned they are with the available routes? And the thing that leads me to that question is this. We've seen a remarkable change in flight paths, particularly on the northern route into the Bay Area, which used to be roughly 50-50 according to the data I've seen, on the east leg versus the west leg going down the bay. But now it's about 25-75, 25 over the bay, 75 over the mountains. That's a huge increase of flight over sensitive areas. Millions of people, quite honestly, are involved in that. And the last one deals with, one of the things I'm hearing is that you're trying to modify the Class B airspace down around in the Big Sur area. And one of the reasons that's happening is that the aircraft initial altitude are so low that you're entering Class B, but then at the junctions of each of the altitude changes, you're running out of Class B, which means the airplanes have to do some remarkable changes just to slow down to hit the 200-mile-an-hour limit that's supposedly in Class G, I think it is. And back and forth. You're in and out of Class B all the way. Why not just raise the altitude and keep them in Class B and pick another turn point instead of Menlo, stick it another mile out to pick up the runway 28 left straight-in approach and make the turn that way. You keep it in Class B the entire way, and you could probably do the OPD descent fully idle. Those are my questions.
Council member?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, the question that I think I would like to hear from the FAA about, as you heard from the communities throughout these public hearings, that there is confusion and unclarity as if the FAA moves Surfer back to Big Sur, how would that come? How would that play out? Obviously, our community is divided. You could see different interpretation. I think the FAA owes us and owes our communities. If that is the option that was being identified as feasible, how would that play out? Would it go back exactly to the old one? Would it go at the same altitude as it is now? The other question that I would like to get answered from the FAA, I know what we are tasked by is just deal with the feasible, but also the unfeasible. What is the next step for the FAA with those? I think we owe it to our public as public servant, to have some answers. If these are not feasible today, what is the next step, and how would the FAA envisions solving these problems?
And Councilmember Lane.
Thank you. Given the lateness of the hour, I'm going to send an email to Chris Zanardi with my questions.
I'd say, is there any objection to adjourning? But I think I know the answer. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to all the members of the public. We appreciate your forbearance. We are adjourned.